I hope you are doing great and thank you for always being there for me. And today I want to answer a quick question that someone has dropped in the comments below on one of my videos, and the person was talking about backgrounds. Actually, is this question right here. Alright, there are so many reasons why I haven't actually done a full background tutorial, because it's more of something you do by yourself depending on the story you are trying to tell rather, or depending on what you are creating. So you will have to choose the type of background you want and stuff. The whole idea of creating a proper background is your ability to think creatively and be able to use the tools that are available to you properly, because somebody might be telling a story of some characters in space. The background will be different, and somebody might be telling a story of a story of a family. So you have a house, well built house with chairs and all those other stuff inside. But in this quick tutorial, what I'll be explaining for you is just some little things I feel that if you understand, you will know how to always create your backgrounds properly. So let's get into it real quickly. The main thing you need to know when creating a background is understanding your perspective properly, knowing where to place your characters and how to place your character. For example, you want to draw a box. It doesn't matter whether you are doing 2D animation. If it's 2D, you need to still apply perspective, not except you just want it to be on a flat plane. Everything would be on a flat plane, like this. Let me change this color real quick here. And so not except you want everything to be on a flat plane. So let's say maybe this is your character. So you have, I think I should bring in a character. Alright, so I'll be using this character to create this animation. And first of all, not except you want your background to be flat. So you will just make everything flat depending on what you are trying to present and depending on what your story is about. So you could just always make your background flat. But the thing with Moho Studio is when you make very flat backgrounds, it looks a bit funny. So let me just, maybe this is these are, I don't know, windows or something. Alright, so if we render this out, for example, you could see how the character suddenly fits into the background and stuff like that. But one thing you need to keep in mind is you always have a split between the floor and the wall of the house. And even if you have a perspective, don't worry, I will show you that. I just want to explain. Even if you have a perspective, you still also need to have a split between the wall and the floor. So let's say, for example, this is the wall, for example. Then we now have this as the floor where he's standing on. So let's make this maybe gray and put our color in there. So you could see there's now some sudden difference. I'll quickly render that out. Let me go to the project setting and make so that I'll have much more faster render and change the dimension to 480. Alright, so Ctrl R to render. So we now have this. So you could see now immediately we have a floor, we have a wall, then we'll probably have windows. You can go ahead and design this as much as you want. But when you look at this, you will notice that it is very flat. You really can't tell how far is the wall from him. Not except you want the wall to be that close to him, depending on what you are creating, as I said initially. But what about if you want the wall to be farther apart? How do you create that? Now this is where you now need to have the idea of perspective and simulate the idea of 3D. And for you to do that is just having simple drawing. So I will just turn this off and create a new vector here. Since he's standing here and I'm trying to create something, what I'll do is create a simple perspective line to give me an idea of how the room supposed to be like. So you could see what I just drew right now. This right here now gives me a better idea of where he's standing and how he's standing. If I raise this up, you could see the ground is probably going up, slanting. But if I bring this down to this level, let's say at his foot level, then the wall should start from this part. So I can go ahead and draw, holding shift if I want, so that I have a very straight line. Alright, then on this part I draw it up, then at this part here I drag it to this side and join it to this point. I drag this to this side and join it to this point. So you can see it's really very simple and basic, and I could just go ahead and put the colors I want in, and I could make this Ctrl P to make all the edges sharp. Alright, so right now what we are seeing is we now have a wall, and we now have this character standing in a 3D simulated space which we have created. So when we look at this right now, you could actually see him in a room. It's not as flat as the other one, the other sample that we gave right here, which is, you know, basically very flat and doesn't look really good. Okay, so what we'll do right now is to make this wall or the 3D space look much more proper. What you have to do is now use your colors to identify, use your colors to show shades, because this part of the wall, which is the same color with this part and this part, but it would have different shades. So what I'm trying to explain here is what you do is on the left part of the wall, you can come in here and drag it down a bit just to make it a little bit darker than this other part. Alright, then at this point, depending on where the light is actually reflecting from, so when you are creating your background, you should also always consider where your light might be reflecting from, even if you are not going to show your light reflection on the character, but you need to have this sort of feel that there is light somewhere in the room and also on the character if you really want to make your work look very good. So at this point now, I'll just raise here a little bit to be a bit much more lighter than this part. So if we render this out, what we'll see now, now looking at this, I think I should change the project settings so it will be much more clearer for us to see. So let me leave it at 720. So if we look at it right now, we could see that, from this part, the difference is not really that much, and you could also go ahead for artistic purposes. You could actually make the difference very glaring. It really depends on you actually. It really depends on what you are creating. But what I'm trying to show you here is how to do a job that looks really good. So if I should shift this character, at this point the character is actually very close to the wall. So if I should shift the character forward a bit, let's say at this point, now we have some sort of distance. I probably reduce his size a bit so that he fits properly into the room. Now the idea here is you are trying to simulate real life when you are creating backgrounds I think in whatever animation software you have, and it's not really simple, but sometimes you can go to the extent of also taking a picture or having actors in real life. It could be your brothers, it could be your friends, have them sit down in the way you want to animate, then you take a picture, then you look at the depth of the picture, you look at the space, you look at how they are sitting and the positions they are, so you could actually place your character properly in the scene. So if you look at this right now, you could actually tell that the character is in the scene, is in the room. Another way of understanding backgrounds is knowing which objects are closer to the camera and which objects should be farther from the camera. It is still perspective, but on a flat 2D plane. Take for example this animation you see here. This is a gaming style type of background. If you play games a lot on your app, you will see this type of 2D background where you have some objects faded in the background and some objects closer to the camera that you can see properly. Having this in mind would help you create better. Looking at nature, this is the way nature also creates its things. When you go outside and look at things that are far off, you see them a little bit faint, and those that are closer to you, you see them much more clearer, isn't it? So when you have a flat 2D background like this, let me turn the character off so that you would see and understand what exactly I did here. I think this background is good enough. So for the first thing I did here, let me zoom out so you'd see. I have this first layer. Let me turn this off. The first layer, which is the main background, and this could be any color you want, which could be the sky or whatever color you want, depending on whatever you are creating. Like I said initially, you create this and you put your gradient or whatever color, and the next thing for you to do is to create the objects that are far off. And these objects could be anything. It could be houses, it could be silos, huts like what I have here, it could be people, it could be mountains, it could be trees, it could be anything you want that are far off. Then you now have those that are close by, and these ones that are close by here, they could also still be buildings, trees, bushes, or whatever. You have them drawn out. Okay, then the final one is you now have your ground where your character would stand on. You have it right there. Then when you now place your characters, it suddenly just fits in. For this one, I'm just going to do something real quick so that you get the whole idea of what I just explained. Okay, and you can also do this with images that you've gotten from the internet. Also, it's all the same idea, but I'm going to create real quickly, not something too complicated, because like I said, I don't have enough time. So let's say this is our background, so I'll call this BKG background. Then I'll go to my styles, I'll make it blue, probably make a gradient here, a real quick one. I'm not doing anything special, so control to create the gradient. My gradient is created, and we have our blue skies like this. All right, we have something like this. Okay, and the next thing is for us to create another layer. Now this the second layer we are creating that is on top of it. It's the objects that are far away and are distant. All right, so the next thing for you to do now is create, let's say maybe very large buildings. I'll have to remove the gradient and make it plain. And let's say these buildings are what color now? Should they be black? I don't know. All right, so maybe we have orange buildings that are far off. Ctrl Z, trying to be as fast as I can. Ctrl Z. So we'll now have something like this. We'll make it white. All right, so Ctrl C, Ctrl V, like this. This is a sample, so don't, when you are doing your own creation, you should make it much more perfect and much more better than mine. So I'm just trying to make you understand everything. So let's say this is the building we have. So we'll have them, since they are far off buildings, we could have very large ones like this that are up into the skies, or we could just bring it down to something like this, you know, so that we could still see the sky a bit, right? Then Ctrl C, Ctrl V will bring another building here, probably reduce the size a bit somewhere around here. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. Now these buildings could be of different colors. It really depends on you or what you want. Since they are far off, it's no problem. And we'll do something like this, and we'll have something like this. You know, you get the whole idea. Ctrl C, Ctrl V, and you could do this very largely if you are going to be doing a very wide angle shot. It really depends on you anyways. So now these buildings we have here, since they are far off, they should be much more, you see that they could be blurry or they could be a bit faint in the scene. So you could do this in two ways. You can come to the blur radius here. Okay, so you see what I just did. I double clicked on this. All right, go to general, then go to the blur radius on that file. Then we'll probably make it blur and maybe like 4 or so. Then maybe the opacity to be maybe 80, you know. So if we render this real quickly, this is what we'll have. So we have these buildings that are a little bit blurry and it looks a bit far off. So the next thing we'll do is that let's name this layer. So this is proper buildings far off buildings OFF. I'll just name that B to be fast. Then I'll create a new layer. This new layer now will now take new buildings that are much more closer, or we should have maybe some bushes in between before the buildings or something like that. So what we'll now do here is we'll now go ahead and create new buildings. Let's just create new buildings. All right, so I'll go ahead and create new buildings which would cover this place here, which would be random. So I'll just make these new buildings not orange as those ones, and let me make them a different color. Let me just pick gray. All right, then this is just for example base, okay, please. Then all right, so when we render this out real quickly, this is what we'll have. So if you look at it, it now gives a perspective of, yeah, there are actually buildings way far behind and there are buildings that are closer here. And you can also go ahead and make these buildings much more fainter and much more blurry, and these ones will now be also a little bit blurry. Then the next buildings you are going to put in front will now be much more clearer, so it will now give this shade of, yeah, oh, this is the city lining, for example, where you have buildings coming from afar and looking different, having different shades per se. So I'm reducing the line width right here. So the next thing for you to do now, this camera view is viewing more like the top of the building, the top of the city rather. All right, so but you could see now we now have the sky, we now have the building. It now has some sort of perspective. That means an aeroplane can also fly in between this place and not feel too flat per se. Here we could bring the camera down to this point, then we could add a floor to this, then let's call this ground where people are actually walking on, GRD. So enter, and we could come here and put our ground here. So the ground needs to be above these buildings, sort of, or they need to meet at a particular point, which is somewhere around here. All right, so one of the things you have to do here to make this really look proper is to make sure that these buildings are actually on the ground and not floating in the sky or in the air. So I'll just drag this to be aligned with the ground itself, something like this. Hope I'm doing this right. And something like this, and something like this. So this you could actually do initially, depending on, I just switch the view, so I'm just trying to make this look much more proper, so that when we render it out we'll have a proper view of it. So you could see actually we now have a city and it's looking correct. This also needs to be fixed anyway. So you now have something very flat, but it has a depth of some sort. All right, it has depth of some sort, which is what you are gunning for. Okay, so let me take this up a bit here, so it's on the ground in itself. All right, so if I should bring in a character or a car is passing by, it makes it look really good. And I could go ahead and add maybe a new layer here, how you create stuff like this. So when I render this out, so you could see if you now have somebody walking by here, it looks more like a real city. It looks good. Mind you, this could be, all these buildings here could actually be much more better and well shaded and so on and so forth. And if you really want to go deep into your background and make it and animate your camera at the same time with your background, like maybe having a zoom in and have your camera pass through the bushes and trees and what have you, all you have to do is use your camera tool. So you can come here and rotate this view. When you rotate this view like this, if you notice, your character is quite, everything is, you know, stuck together at this point. So what you need to do is you go to your character and you drag it forward. So what you're trying to do now is put everything in much more perspective. So you can drag your character forward. So when you reset this, so now you see your character is much more forward here. So when you play around with your camera, let me remove that animation there. So at this point, when you play around with your camera, you could have your camera now zoom in to your character if you want. You can see your camera, this arrow here, you can see zooming in and zooming out. So we could have something like, let's say from that point to this point, you have your camera zoom in and passes your character. So if we should play this, what we've done, you could see how it's moving into. So you could say it's not the same thing with when everything is flat like this and you are zooming in like this. No, not really. Actually, it's not the same thing. All right, it's not the same thing. Okay, so when you have that, you can actually have, if you really take your time to understand this camera motion, it's really very simple. It will help you understand how to play around with your backgrounds properly. So the next thing for you to do, if you want to go ahead and really make this interesting, is you can start shifting your bushes, your trees, and all you just have to do is just shift the layers around and stuff. Take for example the sun. This is the background. The background, you can shift it further. All right, then the sun, you can shift it to much more further. The bushes and trees, this is the rock, you can shift it maybe much more further behind, you know, give it a little bit of space, and the bushes will now be maybe much more forward. All right, and or you can just leave it where it is. So if we go back, if we reset this view right now, you could see that everything is a bit here and there. But what you finally done is you have been able to put everything into perspective so that you can actually use your camera properly. And when you are, let's zoom out a bit and render it out so you could see how it is. So if you see, as I'm using my camera to move right here, you could see your background moving in sort of a scattered position. Yes, it's okay. It's not like your animation is going to be bad at the end of the day. No, no, no. Don't be afraid and don't get confused. You are just getting your animation properly created, and you are going to make it look really good at the end of the day. So all you have to do is just, you know, widen out your background, your sky, or your main background rather, then so that when you have this going on, you know, you have your bushes, so and so on and so forth. Because when the camera is looking down, it's now as if everything is coming down, you are going to the top, and like this everything is going up at the same time. So I think it's a really good look for the camera itself. So when we get to this point, so you could see how the zoom really makes a whole lot of sense. You understand? At this point now, you can, instead of going back to the camera to struggle with that, you can just come to this point and drag it to see the sun. Okay, so if you have that, let's say from here you zoom into the sun, no, that didn't really work out as I wanted to work out, so I'll Ctrl Z to undo that. So we have this to this point, then I'll go back here, reset the view so you can see where the camera is here. Then I will drag, let's say maybe at 36. I will now hold Alt, Ctrl Z, I need to pick my camera, hold Alt, you go back and forth when you hold Alt, when you release it you go up. Alright, then you can go to the side, left and right depending on where you are dragging it to. Okay, so you can use this view to view properly whether you are viewing the sun. I think from here we should be able to see the sun, right? Okay, so when we reset the view to see the animation itself, so from 24 we drag and we get to the sun. So at this point we can now manually just drag it in so that it be at the center. So what we have in the whole animation is something like this. Alright, so you could see now it looks much more proper. Now don't worry about whether everything is scattered or not. It really doesn't matter, because while you are creating your animation with such background, you're actually taking shots by shots, so it's not a big problem for you to go back. When you cancel the camera animation there, everything comes back to normal. So let's say for this shot, this is what you want to do. You know, it starts, you know, vroom, he's a young man, and woo, 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 the sun is, you understand what I'm saying? So at this point you could see that it didn't catch the cut, or it moved in properly. And even if it cuts that this point where it's severed from this plane, you can always adjust it if you want. I know I'm saying a lot. I hope you really understand what I'm saying. So the point is, when it comes to backgrounds, it's all about what you want to create. If backgrounds are a major issue, you can always outsource it to somebody who really knows what he wants to do, because it all depends on your story. We'll just do a quick recap. The first thing is understanding your perspective. Just keep in mind that nobody is actually holding you or stopping you from your creative abilities. Whatever you create is yours. That is why it's called creativity. As long as it's interesting and we can always watch and be happy about it, or you're able to pass an intuitive, educative, funny sort of message, and it makes everybody entertained and happy. I think that is what it's all about. All right, so I hope this is helpful. Check out my next video if you want to learn how to do much more creation on Moho Studio, and I will see you inside. Have a lovely day and bye.
Shine bright like a diamond. Shine bright like a diamond.